In this video, we're going to cover a simple saving and loading system created basically from scratch. We're going to be saving our variables out to storage, and then when we need to, load our saved game from storage and repopulate our variables. I've gone ahead and quickly made a basic setup here. Our player has a score at the top. He can run around, he can collect these coins, and every time he does that, his score increases. However, if we were to quit the game, and let's say we came back, let's say this represented maybe a global score, a high score, player's health, it really doesn't matter, but it's something we wanted to persist. Well, unfortunately it wouldn't. We're not saving it out. So we're going to quickly create a simple save game system and loading system hooked into our game mode so that way it's available all the time and easy to use. All this code can be ignored. We're going to start from scratch. And the easiest way of doing this is inside of our game mode, I've created two functions, save our game and load our game. And they're both empty. What we're going to do is we're going to populate save our game with the variables we want to save. And then we're going to populate load our game by pulling them out and putting them where we want them. And we're doing it in here so it's easy enough to add on later. May not be the best way of doing this, especially with larger things you're going to save, but this is really quick and simple and effective. So let's do it. But enough talk, let's do it. We need a save game object. Let's go ahead and create a new save game object, which is going to be under a blueprint class, all classes, and then type in save, and we'll have a save game. Go ahead and select save game and select it and then name it. We're going to call this one, our save game, because why not? And we have a save game object. When we use the saving and loading system, it basically pulls data from here, our save game object, and then we can do what we want with it. Or it takes the data inside of the save game object and puts it out to storage. Now, what is our save game object? Well, it's like any other object. For the most part, it has its own event graph with a few restrictions, but the primary use is to save out the variables inside of it. Let's create one called player score, because we want to save out our player score. We'll turn this into an integer and we'll go and just save it. And that's all we need to do with our save game right now. It is holding a player score variable. We'll go and close down our coin, we'll close down our map, we'll close down our UI, and we'll go into our third person game mode. So this is our game mode where we have our save and load games. Now, if we were to, for example, type in the save game to slot node, this is the node we're going to use to save. So we'll go and hook this up. We'll need an object, but we don't have our save game we can select. Well, we need an actual physical object that's been created that we're going to save out. So we can either use like a reference, or generally we would create a save game. We'll create our save game object. And if we hook this up, well, we'll notice now that we save out our save game. Now we need to make sure it's the correct class. That's going to be the one that we created called our save game. Once we do that, now our output will be a proper save game reference, and we should be good to go right here. Now, one of the issues with this is every time we call save our game, we're going to basically create a new save game object. We're not actually going to use our current variables. We're not going to use the one we may have loaded up already. So let's make sure we can kind of account for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a valid node. Valid nodes are great for knowing if things are valid or not. We're going to check and see if our save game object is valid. Now we don't have one yet. It's going to be in the load script. So let's quickly jump into our load script. This one's simple. We're going to load game from slot. We don't need to actually fill out anything. We're just going to grab our return value and we're going to go ahead and promote this to a variable. Now, there is a small issue. If we were to do that, it's going to be of type save game, which is fine. However, anytime we want to actually get any variables from here, for example, if we wanted to get our player score, well, it's not going to work because we need to actually cast it to our save game and then we can get the player score. So to make this simpler, we're going to go ahead and not save it like this. We're going to get rid of the one we just created. We're going to cast it first to our save game, and then we're going to promote it to a variable. Now that we've done that, our output is actually going to be of the correct type. We can get our player score directly from here. So let's name this properly. This is going to be our save game reference. We're not actually doing anything in here, but we've gone ahead and created our save game reference so we can populate our save. Now we go in here. Right now, keep in mind, this is empty right now. There's nothing in here. We don't actually have a valid save game with any data in it. We need to go to our save game now. Let's make sure we have a valid one. We should always have a valid one, but we're going to just basically double check and be safe. I don't know why. It should never happen when we finish this, but it's kind of a safety check. So if we don't have a valid one, we need a valid one. Now, technically, if we go into our load game, we're loading and we're saving. So now we actually should worry about creating. So we'll go ahead and create a save game object right here. We're going to go ahead and make sure it's our save game. We're going to cast it just like we did before, so we can make sure it's proper. And then we're going to store that in our save game reference like this. If I can stop clicking this. And there we go. So now in the event that we don't have a good save game reference, we haven't loaded one, we've started in some weird state. Now we're going to create one so we have one because we want to make sure we have one. So we're good here. We'll move our little savey thingy over here and now we're good. Now if we do have a valid one, well, we can just skip all this code. So we'll drag this over here, type in reroute, plug this into here, move this up a little bit because it should be up. And we have our nice little first start. So let's see, we're going to save. So we actually need to now populate our save game slot. Right now, if we were to save our game, so right here, our save game reference, we're going to need to fill in this, but right now we're saving whatever values are in there. Nowhere have we ever actually filled this out. We're just simply saving it to disk, and it'll be whatever the default values are. Let's move this over a little bit, and let's fill out our save game reference. So let's grab our save game reference. We're going to set the player score now, and we're going to set it to, well, our player score. And our player score is conveniently inside of our game mode, so it makes it a little easier. It doesn't matter where it's at. As long as you keep track of where it is and where it's going, you can basically pull the data from anywhere and store it in your reference. So we're saying, okay, player score, go into your save game reference, and it's going to save the local score here inside of our third-person game mode into the save game object in the player score variable. Now at this point in time, if we were to write this out to disk, well, it's going to save the valid object, and that's what we want. But we need to fill in the other two pieces of information. Slot name is your save game name. This is, if you're on like a Windows platform, this will be the file name. If you're on like a mobile platform, it'll technically be the file name, but it's in the storage object. All that matters is this is the name for this save game to keep it unique. So let's just make this really simple, and we'll call this save game. Save game 1, save game to slot. So technically it's a slot name. So we'll just call this slot 1. We'll make it simple. We're going to save this into slot 1. We'll think of it as like Zelda where there's multiple slots. So we'll save this into slot 1. User index is another way to further identify this. Since this is a single player game and we only have one person playing, we don't even have to worry about this. We're just going to keep it at 0. And this is it. This code right here saves it out to disk. So we could go ahead and play. We could go like this and hopefully not fall off the edge. And then if we were to save our game, I haven't set up our buttons yet, it'll save it to disk. Now the next thing we need to do is actually make sure our variables are good, and we need to be able to load them. So let's go to our load game. We're going to look through here. Well, we've already determined what our slot name is. We determined it was slot 1. Well, why don't we make this a little smarter? Since we know we're going to use the same name, let's put it into a variable so we don't screw it up. Now, if we drag off of here and promote to a variable, two things happen. It gives us our variable, and if we go and compile and save, it defaults to what we had in there already. So really handy if you're going to promote after you've set it up. So this will be our save game slot name. So now, if we go into our load our game, we can drop it in here and we're done. So that will load our game from slot. Now there's a couple things in here. If we try to load our game from slot, like you can see here, it's null if the load fails. This is what I was doing my check for right here in terms of valid. So let's say we load up our game for the first time. The player's never played it. We're going to call our load game script. It's going to go ahead and load it from the slot. It's going to fail because we don't have a save game in that slot. And then we're going to go on. We're not going to be able to set our save game reference, so we're basically going to have nothing. Next time we come through and save, we're going to check. Well, we have nothing. We've never loaded before, so let's go ahead and create it so we can actually create a brand new save game and then save it out. Now let's say we had a valid one. Well, we're going to go in here. We're going to load it from slot, cast it to our save game, and store it. And now in this part, we want to actually set our variables. So we already know that we are saving by setting our player score and getting our player score right here locally. So we're going to do the opposite. We're going to grab our player score right here and set it to the variable we get out of our save game reference. So grab our save game reference, get the player score, and set it right here. And then you would basically repeat this for every variable you would want. This right here, save game reference, if we've gotten to this point, is going to be a valid one after we've loaded. So that's why this will actually be the saved value. Now, of course, after we have saved, after we've loaded, you probably want to do any form of initialization. For example, in my case, when I load up the game, I update the score. So that way the score looks correct. What I'm going to do is actually pull this out. I'm going to make a new function called initialize values. Initialize values. Oh, screw it. Init values, because I can't spell initialize. And this is just going to be a function that I call whenever I want to basically do things. Pull in values from somewhere else, initialize values to their default settings, update the UI. It's just, this is going to get called whenever I want things to be correct. So after we load our game, after all of our loading's done, we'll call init values. And now it should work. So let's go ahead and play this, see what happens. Well, text block is bad, because when I pulled the code, I forgot to tell this right here to initialize the values. So we'll go back in here. And now we have score of 0. We will go here, 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 here. Now you hopefully will figure out what the problem is. I go back in, we have our saving and our loading, but nothing happened. Well, we never actually told our game to call save or load. Probably would have been smart. What we're going to do is just simply grab our load UI right here, our game UI. I'm just going to drag a button on the bottom. I'm going to name this save game. You can obviously set this up at checkpoints, automatically, over time, whenever certain variables change, whatever you want. The point is, when we want to save the game, we will grab our game mode. We're going to cast it to our third-person game mode, so we make sure we're talking to the right one. And we're going to tell it to save our game. And we can do this from anywhere, and it's going to grab the appropriate values and save them to disk. So now, if I play this, grab a couple things, we'll go with like 4 of them, and I click save this, it should be saved to disk. We'll go ahead and close this, hit play. Well, we still have score 0, but we probably have score 0 because we've never actually loaded our game. Now, it should be easy to check. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to our game mode. We don't need our UI anymore. And somewhere we need to load. So let's see. We are creating our widget, and then we're initializing the values. We probably want to initialize our values after we load the game. So if we go into here and grab our load game object, we'll actually find and notice something. We're initializing the values after we load, and we're initializing our values after we load. So this one probably isn't needed. We're just going to keep load game to simply load our game, and we're going to keep initialize values separately. So now it should work. And there we go, score of 5. We'll go ahead and grab a couple more, save our game, exit out, hit play, score of 9. Simple as that. That is a very simple saving and loading game system. And all you'd have to do if you want to further expand it is make sure you have values to save and load. Really quickly, I can show you this. Let's go into our user interface. This is completely pointless, but this is to show how easy it is. And I need to make sure I have a UI element so we can actually, do I need a UI element? You know what, I'm just going to print it out. We don't need a UI element. we have our saving and our loading. So we're going to save another variable. Let's go ahead and move this over a little bit. And we need to set inside of our save game reference another variable. 3 steps. Grab our save game object and make sure our variable is set in here. So this one's going to be the player health, is what this one's going to be. This one's going to be a float called player health. Save game object is done. We're going to grab our save game reference again, and we're going to set the player health. So inside of our save game object, we're now going to set the player health variable so we can save it out to disk. And now we just need our player health variable. Well, we don't actually have one because I haven't created it yet, but it's pretty simple. We'll go to our third person blueprint. We'll go to our player, and we're going to put it inside of our player. We're going to call this the player's player health. We'll make it a float. And we'll go ahead and set this to 50 just so we can verify it's working. And maybe I'll make a little thing that subtracts health. You know what? I'll go ahead and do that right now. We'll call this the H key for health. And all I'll do when I do the H key is we'll grab the health and we'll decrement it. Decrement basically removes 1. So we'll do that. And yeah, so every time I hit H, we're just going to remove 1 for the player health. This way we can watch it actually working. We are going to go into our game mode now. We need to get our player health. Again, doesn't matter where it comes from, as long as we can get it, we can put it into our save game. So we're going to get our player character. We need the correct player character, so we're going to cast that to our third person character. I'm going to right click and convert it to pure, that way I don't have to execute it. And we're going to get the player's health. So now that I have the player's health, we just plug that into our player. And now it should basically grab the health from the player and put it into our save game reference. So now every time we save the game, we're saving our player health. We're not actually loading it or doing anything right now, but we are saving it out to disk. Now we do the opposite. We'll grab our load game. We will, let's see, we need to get our player character. We are going to cast that again back to the third person. We're going to make it pure again. And this time we're going to set the player health. Go ahead and hook it up. And we're going to set it to whatever value we have. And that value, of course, will be our save game reference, which I accidentally deleted. There we go. Save game reference. Get the player health from it right here and hook it up. So now our game's going to load up. We're going to grab the save game reference from our loaded game, grab the player health out of our save game, and then set the player's health by grabbing the player character and setting the health on the player character to whatever our value was. We'll go ahead and play, and everything should be fine. We can't see it yet, but we're going to fix that right now. Go back to our third person character. We have H set up to remove health. I'm going to make the J key show my health, just really simply. We'll grab the health and we will print string, and of course that's going to hook it up to the wrong place, so we'll do this. Here we go, in string J. So now the H key will remove my health and the J key will print out whatever the current player's health is. So if we were to go into our game and hit J, we can see 50. If I hit H a couple times and hit J again, well, we're at 43. Close the game out, start it back up, hit J. Well, we're still at 50. I never saved. Let's go ahead and get rid of some health. We're now down to, let's go with 35. I'm going to save this time, stop the game and play, and then print the health. We're at 35. It remembered our health. That's it. That is a basic, simple save game system inside of our game mode. Once we have things set up, as you can see, for saving and loading, all we have to do is just simply add more variables to save or load, and everything else works properly. Really simple. One hint, it's probably easier to manage your save game object itself if you use things like structs or arrays, and you save those out to disk. By that, I mean, if we look at our save game object, we have player score and player health. Well, what if we have player inventory, player stats, player keys, player stamina, player agility, player blah, 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 blah. Usually in game development, at a certain point, you'll realize it's silly to have so many different things individually variables, so then you put them into things like structures or arrays. You can save out structures and arrays. You don't have to save out individual things. You can save out pretty much any variable and then reload that variable back up. So keep that in mind. So if your player has got a structure called player stats, just simply add the player stats to here, save it out, and load it back up. So it'll make loading and reloading, loading and saving and reinitializing variables super simple and quick. And that's it. That is a basic, simple saving and loading system.